My colleague Gaurav Sawant decodes Prime Minister Modi's United Nations General Assembly speech in this exclusive conversation with experts.
Many important points made by Prime Minister Narendra Modi. Let's take them one by one. Let's talk about Afghanistan. We will also talk about the Prime Minister saying if the United Nations needs to reform if it wants to remain relevant in coming times. And he spoke of COVID, he spoke of Afghanistan. Let me bring into this conversation Lisa Curtis, Senior Fellow and Director of the Indo-Pacific Security Program, Center for a New American Security. She joins us on the broadcast. Also with me is Ambassador Vishnu Prakash, Dr. Sriram Sundar Cholia. We also have with us Richard Rosso, Senior Advisor, Vadwani Chair. Kamar Chima joins us from Pakistan. Aviruk Sen, author, Looking for America. But Lisa Curtis, coming to you first. The world needs to speak in one voice on Afghanistan. The condition of women, minorities, children. Is that actually happening? That is what the Prime Minister is seeking. But is that actually happening, ma'am? Because the Prime Minister also referred to countries using Afghan territory to spread terror, and that being a double-edged sword.
Well, no, I don't think that is happening right now. But I think Prime Minister Modi makes a very good point. And I think it's important for like-minded countries to come together to coordinate a strategy for engaging with the Taliban. I think the only way that we can shape Taliban behavior moving forward, ensure that they do crack down on terrorism, respect human rights, women's rights, ethnic minorities, is if like-minded nations come together, they coordinate their diplomatic messaging as well as their economic assistance. I think that's absolutely critical. And I was glad to see that the Quad made a pretty strong statement in their joint statement on Afghanistan. And the U.S.-India joint statement also mentions Afghanistan and the importance of the Taliban making sure that their country is not used by terrorists. So it's very concerning what is happening in Afghanistan. The Taliban have named a very hardline interim government. So unless like-minded countries like India, the United States, and others come together, coordinate our positions, that gives us the best chance.
But are these positions coordinated, Ambassador Vishnu Prakash? Because for India, is there anything to indicate that Taliban 2.0 is any different from Taliban of the past? Any actions of Taliban 2.0 yet? So how do you, move forward India, America, or like-minded countries together? What does that do to India's position?
Gaurav, the Doha group seemed to be little moderate. They had learned the language in which the world speaks. They had been exposed to the outside world. They also understood that the regressive, the puritanical form of Wahhabi Islam that they want to impose will not work. But they have been cast aside. And instead of sorting out the difference of opinion through a dialogue, it's now clear that there were fist fights and gunfights. So that is how Taliban sorts out even internal differences. So what has come to, which is calling the shots, is the Haqqani group. And the Haqqani group is the worst of the worst. So today it seems that the so-called 2.0 or 2.25 is even worse than 1.0. So that is the whole challenge, and that is the dilemma that is posed to the international community because they are in effective power. Let me again mention what is rankling a little, and I was also surprised, is that the talk of inclusive administration in Taliban seems to have been diluted, both in the India-US joint statement and in the Quad joint statement. There is no mention of inclusive administration in Afghanistan.
Lisa Curtis, how would you read this then? The effort all along was that ethnic groups, the Tajiks, the Uzbeks, Hazaras, women, all of them would be brought into this establishment. That clearly doesn't seem to be happening. Our democracies, instead of pushing Afghanistan, the Taliban to be more inclusive? Are they actually letting Taliban use their might to call the shots, ma'am?
Well, I really hope not, because then we have no chance to ensure that Afghanistan doesn't again become a terrorist safe haven. So I think that that is correct, that we should not back down from demanding an inclusive Afghan government. And it was very disappointing to see that Sirajuddin Haqqani was made the interior minister. This is a known terrorist leader with U.S. blood on his hands, not to mention Afghan, so many other nationalities as well. But the point is that the interim government is a hardline government. Yes, the Haqqanis have the upper hand. This is very problematic. There's no way that the U.S. should even consider recognizing a Taliban government that has known terrorist leaders as part of the government. That is completely unacceptable.
And is this, Pakistan pushing this mentality that push the world, ultimately the world will relent? And that is why you have the Haqqani network that's calling the shots, the Doha faction, they've been completely sidelined. But in a way, in all of this, is Pakistan also playing a very dangerous game? Kamar Chima, the world is looking at this situation very closely, but Imran Khan, he thought that he would come to New York, address the United Nations General Assembly, sought a summit with the US President Joe Biden, and that clearly didn't happen, despite an effort made by your foreign minister and your national security advisor, let alone a summit, not even a phone call. Is that a loss of face for Pakistan?
Well, I think we understand that the Pakistan-US relations have always been transactional. So we do not have high hopes in this post-US withdrawal from Afghanistan. We understand this is a complex situation, and the Americans are reviewing the situation, which means that they do not high-rate Pakistan's position, and they understand that Pakistan does not support much of the position of the United States in Afghanistan. And particularly, Secretary Blinken spoke at the Congress a few weeks ago and said that Pakistan has worked against our interest and for our interest in Afghanistan. So we do not agree to the Americans on everything. So we have kept that position. But as far as Imran Khan's face saving is concerned, for many it will be a point that yes, Imran Khan definitely wants to speak to the high level at higher level in the United States. But for some reasons, the Americans don't want to engage with the Prime Minister, which is a challenge for Prime Minister Imran Khan as well, because that is also considered as one of his foreign policy challenge for not having a normal relation with the Americans, to whom Pakistan has engaged for 20 years. And Pakistan has given 80,000 lives, but yet Americans do not trust Pakistan. So this is one of the challenge for the entire Pakistan.
That's the point that India was making, and Lisa Curtis, India has made that point that Pakistan is an arsonist that pretends or disguises itself as a firefighter. But has the US, when it was the Trump administration, it was argued that the US had seen through Pakistan's double game. But the current administration, in your appreciation, what do you make of Joe Biden not meeting Imran Khan despite repeated requests of Pakistan's foreign minister and national security advisor? Is this only temporary, and ultimately will America give in and incentivize Pakistan supporting the Haqqani network?
Well, I think it's clear the U.S. and Pakistan are on completely divergent paths when it comes to their interests in Afghanistan. Pakistan very much supports the Haqqani network. Pakistan feels very comfortable having Haqqani leaders in positions of power because they feel like they have more influence and they're better able to control the Haqqanis. Somebody like Barater, who spent 8 years in a Pakistani jail, is somebody the Pakistanis would not be particularly comfortable with, because somebody like Barater would seek more distance from Pakistan. But at the same time, the Haqqani network, it's a State Department designated foreign terrorist organization. They've committed terrorism against U.S. citizens, killed U.S. citizens. And so there's just no reconciling these two very divergent positions. With regard to whether President Biden will engage with Imran Khan, I think it depends on, what happens moving forward. Will Pakistan try to play a more helpful role in terms of allowing moderates to come up and encourage that kind of future for Afghanistan. We haven't seen it so far, but I think it really depends on what Pakistan does moving forward. I think right now Pakistan is testing, it's seeing how much it can get away with, how much the international community will just sort of back down and accept what's happening at face value. And that's why I think it's so important for the U.S. to work with like-minded countries like India, like the European Union, like the UK, set down some conditions for its engagement with the Taliban, and be firm on that. Come at this.
Are we all on the same page? Dr. Sriram Cholia, whether it's India or the United States of America or European countries, are they on the same page, or can Pakistan follow that Chinese template and say something to A, B, C, and D and continue to get away with terror?
Yeah, this is called triangulation in politics. But I don't think Pakistan can really find a way out of its own corner that it's dug itself in. It's now so dependent on China and to a lesser extent on Qatar and Turkey, and that's about it. And it doesn't really have much international support. And like you're mentioning, Gaurav, the kind of snub that Imran Khan got from Joe Biden, it clearly shows that, there's nothing that the US really expects from Pakistan in a positive sense. I mean, and that's how the world has come to see Pakistan now. There's nothing positive coming from them.
Okay.
So at least they should not do bad things.
Before I bring in Ambassador Vishnu Prakash on red lines, Lisa Curtis, does the US have defined red lines that this is what they expect of the Afghanistan government, if money is to be paid or if resources have to be pumped in to restore democracy in whatever form in Afghanistan, even if you may call that democracy under Taliban rule? For example, take action against the Haqqani network. He's the interior minister, or bring in Mullah Baradar as the prime minister. He's currently deputy prime minister, or bring in Stanikzai, or no such defined red lines, ma'am.
Well, I think that this is being worked out now behind the scenes. I don't see any particularly firm red lines at the moment. But as I said, I think that's really important, because I think, unfortunately, the way the U.S. negotiated the Doha agreement, very weak agreement, in a sense, it emboldened the Taliban. So, we're in this position where the Taliban has felt emboldened by the way the U.S. negotiator has treated them over the last 3 years with real kid gloves. So I think that we need to demonstrate that it won't be acceptable to have terrorist leaders as part of the government. It won't be acceptable to not allow girls to go to school, women to work, that there will have to be a level of respect for human rights if the Taliban has any hope of being recognized by the rest of the international community. But no, to answer your question, I don't think those red lines have been set yet. And that's why I think it's so important when leaders like Prime Minister Modi do set down some of those red lines. So perhaps they can have some influence on this entire process.
And these red lines are extremely important, Ambassador Vishnu Prakash. As Lisa Curtis also points out, women's rights. Women, they should have access to education. They should have access to work. What we are seeing on ground, on the contrary, is flogging is back. Men are being hung from cranes. They're being hanged openly. Taliban not following any of these rules. So what is Taliban's effort in your view? Are they sending across a message, or is Pakistan sending across that message that we will do what we want, ultimately the world will relent?
Gaurav, I'm afraid I do not see the US having red lines, and if they have red lines, they are cast in sand. US has already dropped Afghanistan effectively like a hot potato. They had decided that enough was enough. It was a millstone around the American neck. The US attention has already shifted to China and South China Sea, etc., etc. So I'm afraid sooner than later, at least this round, Pakistan will prevail again. They will play the waiting game. They will tire out the community. and some kind of a compromise will be found. Taliban will give some assurances which will be taken at face value to be forgotten. I hope I'm wrong, but that is how my feeling or assessment of the situation. Gaurav.
Aviruk, is that also your appreciation? Welcome back, Aviruk. Is that also your appreciation that Pakistan waited out the US for 2 decades? And when we say Taliban, does it actually mean Taliban backed by Pakistan's ISI?
I mean, there are several excellent points made by a number of speakers here. But somehow I get the feeling that the kind of control that we believe that Pakistan has over all of these groups, and there are many in Afghanistan, is total and complete. And it's like as if they are the puppeteers. I don't think in a chaotic country like that is even possible, which is why you have a civil war-like situation in any case.
So if we narrow this down to the Haqqani
Taliban
network,
2.0,
does Pakistan have a vice-like grip on the Haqqani network? Let's break this down. Sure, they may not have control over Mullah Baradar, they may not have control over Sher Abbas Stanikzai, but what about the Haqqani network?
Look, of course it does. Of course it does, to a much greater extent than the other groups perhaps. But let's take a step back and look at Taliban 2.0. Now, Taliban 2.0, how did this happen? The difference between Taliban 1.0 and 2.0 is that Taliban 2.0 was legitimized, in a sense, without making any concrete promises or taking any steps. I don't think anybody in their right minds thought that they wouldn't take over the country by whatever means at the time of the US withdrawal. I don't think, I mean, there are people much better qualified than me on this panel who, I mean, I put the question to them, did any of them really believe that suddenly Afghanistan would turn into a democracy and Taliban would become a secular liberal sort of entity? I don't think anyone in their right mind would have thought that. But what's happened as a result of the Trump administration, frankly, and I think Lisa mentioned this earlier, for the last 3 years, there's been a legitimization of the Taliban. Now, that presents an opportunity for the Taliban as well to actually, capitalize on that. Okay. Not necessarily by violence, but by doing, well, a few more acceptable things. So it actually presents an opportunity as well.
But they haven't done a single, not a single acceptable thing. But Lisa Curtis, Merit and Ambassador Vishnu Prakash and Aviruk saying that, one, the Americans legitimized Taliban. Two, perhaps the Americans thought enough is enough. 2 decades. Let's focus on, the Indo-Pacific. Forget about Afghanistan. And ultimately, Pakistan, after waiting it out for 2 decades, will call the shots in this region, in AFPAC.
It is clear the Biden administration has shifted attention to the Indo-Pacific, to competing with China. And that is where the majority of United States resources, effort, diplomacy should go, frankly. We were in Afghanistan for 20 years. I think that the decision was made, for better, for worse, may not have been my decision, but the president has made the decision to withdraw U.S. troops. So let's look at how we move forward. And, I would advise the Biden administration not to turn its back on Afghanistan. We've done that in the past. We saw what happened in the early 1990s when the U.S. turned away from Afghanistan. It led to the path to 9/11. We can't have that happen again. So we do have to continue to monitor the situation. We have to maintain counterterrorism capabilities, maintain the ability to strike if necessary in Afghanistan, but also to try to shape the way the Taliban is going to govern the country and the way they're going to relate to terrorists. Okay. So we need to continue. We can continue to do both. It's not an either or proposition, and particularly for India. India has to worry about its western border while also seeking to project influence eastward in Southeast Asia and East Asia. So
the great game is on.
It's not going to be possible to ignore Afghanistan, even as we focus more of our attention on the Indo-Pacific.
And when we say focus on Afghanistan, and I have Raymond Vickery Jr., a senior associate Wadhwani chair at the US-India Policy Studies, joining me on the broadcast. Raymond Vickery, when we say focus on Afghanistan, is the clear indication, as Prime Minister Narendra Modi said at the United Nations General Assembly, terrorism is a double-edged sword. Don't use Afghanistan as that territory to spread terror in the region. It could hurt you. So the focus needs to be very squarely on Pakistan backing the Taliban in Afghanistan.
Well, I don't think there's any question that there is a shift in the understanding of the United States of America to be more cooperative and more sympathetic to the Indian point of view in regard to terrorism, whether it's from Afghanistan or originating on Pakistan territory. What has happened is a fundamental reevaluation, it seems to me, which really in the United States is bipartisan, of our commitment in how we conduct it. It's one thing to have spent, as the United States did, more than $1 trillion, thousands of American lives, and a great deal of time and effort over 20 years. But we have not come up with a successful way of being able to counteract radical Islamic terrorism, authoritarianism from that side. I'm very pleased to see that in the joint statement from the Quad meeting yesterday, there is explicit reference to Afghanistan, to cross-border terrorism, and the need to cooperate on that. That goes along with what happened vis-a-vis free movement in the Indo-Pacific, which is code word for the South China and East China Seas, of course, and even as far afield as the Korean Peninsula and Myanmar.
But in your appreciation, and before I bring in Qamar Chima quickly, sir, does that mean more pressure on Pakistan? Will the United States also be on the same page with India in mounting pressure on Pakistan to rein in these terrorist groups, whether it's the Haqqani network of the Taliban or Lashkar-e-Taiba and Jaish-e-Mohammed?
Well, is that question
it is for you, sir.
Me?
Yes.
Yes. For me, I believe that it's not a question of pressure necessarily. It's a question of the United States and India taking a new and clear-eyed view of Pakistan and the dual game that has been played there for decades. The fact is that Pakistan gave a zone of operation which aided the Taliban. The fact is that Pakistan was not helpful in regard to Osama bin Laden and actually protested when we brought that miscreant to justice.
Yes.
So I think that it's not a question of pressuring, it's a question of being able to deal more effectively with Pakistan. There are elements in Pakistan who want to do the right thing, but there are other elements, particularly in the security area, the ISI and so forth, that we need to take a better and more clear-eyed view. So that is...
What does a better and clear-eyed view mean in terms of action on ground? Because India has been dealing with this situation for decades. And before I bring in Aviruk Sen and Ambassador Vishnu Prakash, I want to quickly bring in Qamar Chima into this conversation. Qamar Chima, you've seen the joint statement, the bilateral joint statement, you've seen the Quad statement, you've heard Prime Minister Narendra Modi at UNGA. Will Pakistan now, will Imran Khan now be under more pressure to take action against terrorists on Pakistani soil and try to rein in the hardline elements in Taliban?
Well, the first thing is that we have maintained our position that whatever little influence we have on the Taliban, we will exercise that. That is the first thing. We do not have an absolute influence on the Taliban. The second thing is, as far as the terrorist organizations are concerned, Pakistan is one of the leading nations which have eliminated the terror infrastructure in Pakistan, and wherever the terrorist organizations are operating.
I very specifically asked you about terrorist organizations like Lashkar-e-Taiba and Jaish-e-Mohammed, UN designated global terrorist organizations on your soil, sir.
Yes, sir. No, let me come to that point. The groups which were the militant groups which were related to the Pakistan's eastern border, Every one of those have dropped the weapons. The cases are against them. The cases are registered. They're facing the charges in the courts, and obviously the law will take its course. And above all, we are not doing it for the pressure of anyone. We are doing it because this is the state's policy that no one can pick up weapon and can go for jihad anywhere. There was a policy in the past, which was with the support of the Americans and the many, to go for jihad like in Afghanistan. But right now, Pakistan is the one country which gave lives. We eliminated the terror infrastructure. Those who are left, they are behind bars.
Lisa Curtis, I'm sure nobody in India will buy this given the latest intelligence inputs that are coming in, the operations that have taken place along the line of control with 3 terrorists being eliminated just 2 days ago and a large amount of arms and ammunition being recovered from those dead terrorists. But will America buy this in today's day and age?
Well, look, I think we need to look at the facts on the ground and, who are the individuals who have been charged? Are these the top leaders that we know about that have been involved in terrorist acts in Pakistan? What has been done with regard to reining in terrorist financing? These are things that the FATF, the Financial Action Task Force Committee, is looking at on a regular basis. When I was in the previous administration, certainly Pakistan had begun to meet some of those benchmarks of the FATF, but they had not met all of them. So frankly, I'm not sure where that process stands at the moment, but I'm sure the Biden administration is looking very carefully what's actually happening on the ground. What is Pakistan doing to rein in terrorist groups? And so, in a way, the Taliban taking over power in Afghanistan means it's too late to penalize Pakistan when it comes to its support for the Taliban. Okay. That's done. But when it comes to these other groups that you're talking about, the LET, the JEM, yes.